today is Aaron Schmidt, and Aaron is currently the Digital Initiatives Librarian for the District of Columbia Public Library. He was part of the team that created the first iPhone and BlackBerry online catalog searching applications. And in 2005, he was named a Library Journal Mover and Shaker. I also want to let you all know that Aaron is from Chicago. However, before you start throwing pens and things at the screen, he does think the Packers will win on Sunday. So I just had to get that little note in there. So without further ado, we'll let Aaron take it away.
Hey everybody. Can I get a confirmation that you're seeing a whole bunch of text on the screen right now so I know this is working?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks for being here, or there this morning, I should say. I'm coming to you from my kitchen in Portland, Oregon. This is the wonders of the internet, huh? I had a very short commute this morning. So thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about your content on the web. So I help libraries with their websites and do a lot of reading about websites and a little bit of a geek. So I'll share some of that passion with you today. And like Jamie said, let me know if you have any questions during this whole affair, and if not, we will take some questions at the end. So I want to make a point right off the bat, and I want to have a whole bunch of text on the screen, and hopefully you're getting the point here. And that's sometimes reading dense text like this can be difficult. So in case you are going to only pay attention to what I say at the beginning, I want to make the point right away that on your website, number one thing that you can do to make it more intelligible is to remove unnecessary words. This will let people using your website use it in a more efficient manner. And the good thing about this is it's a relatively inexpensive thing for libraries to do because there's no crazy technical overhead. All we have to do is use our writing skills. So in general, another thing I want to say about library websites is that I wish we could all just do less on our library websites. And if we do less, I think we can actually make a better website. So there's a common phrase, less is more. I don't really like this phrase because it's still comparing less to more and saying more is better. So I think less is less, and we should be aiming for that. And actually, I have a column I write in Library Journal, and this month's column is all about doing less. So if you want a little bit more on that, take a look at the latest Library Journal. My column is called The User Experience. And really the emphasis or the point behind doing less is this. I think it would be much better to have a website that's half the size of, say, a current website, and make that smaller website just really, really good and excellent, and excite the people that are using it, or at least really engage them. So it's better to have a small website that's really, really good than a bigger website that's a little bit on the bland side, or just not so good. So those are the two tips that I want to give you straight away in case you stop paying attention. Remove unnecessary words, make your website smaller. So those are two important things. But now I want to get into this wonderful, wonderful world of content strategy. And so let's break this down for you real quick. Content, any stuff you have online. So whether it's an HTML page or a PDF.
Excuse me, Aaron?
Yes.
We are seeing, it looks like all of your slides on the screen.
Content, any stuff you have online, whether it is your HTML files, PDFs, MP3s, video files, whatever. So we're going to think about all this. And plainly put, strategy, a plan to achieve a goal. Okay, so this is a fairly basic definition of what content strategy might be. If we jazz it up and make it a bit more informative here, we could say that content strategy is planning for the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable, and desirable content. I think that's a much nicer way to put it, and it breaks it down into what we need to be thinking about. So we need to figure out how the stuff gets made and who's in charge, and we need to make sure that it's something that people want, that it's useful. We need to make sure that they can use it, that it's usable, and we need to make sure that they want to use it. And those are three different but related things, and that's kind of like a holy trinity for user experience. Okay, so why are we thinking about this, and why are we thinking about content strategy in general? Because the chances of you having or of anyone really, not singling you out, the chances of having useful, usable, and desirable content that's magically appear on your website, it's pretty much the same as the chances of a unicorn walking through your library's front doors. It's just not going to happen without a plan. I wouldn't advise planning for unicorns, but we can plan for good websites. So people are busy. We know this, and we know that people don't spend a lot of time on websites. The amount of time they spend even judging the quality of a website and whether they trust it or not is really, really short. So we have to be aware of this and respond to it. Okay, so and if they are not very patient and they don't have a lot of time and our websites are kind of like a labyrinth or kind of cluttered like this, they're just going to take off and they're not going to use it. All right, so let's break this down a little bit as far as the first part of the content strategy goes, about planning for this stuff. So think about how this stuff happens in your library. How does new content on your website get requested? Who is allowed to do this? And what is the mechanism that they can use to request this? And who actually makes the stuff once it gets requested? Do you have any kind of editorial process? And is there a final type of approval? And once it's approved, does someone else publish it, or does the approver publish it? And importantly, who's in charge of updating stuff once it might be out of date? And then the last part of this cycle would be taking a piece of content and archiving it or removing it. So it's useful to think about content as far as from like cradle to grave, right? I don't want if you don't think about content this way, it would be useful to start thinking about the end of the content lifecycle being removed. Okay, my GoToMeeting thing popped up, so I don't know if there's a question. I'm just going to see here. No, I don't think so. All right, so this is the first part of content strategy. There's more to content strategy and writing for the web, and that's how stuff is structured and categorized and styled. But it can be very useful for a library to think about all these roles. So if you don't have these defined roles, think about who your requesters are and go through the list. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one ratio. In other words, what I'm trying to say is you might have many requesters and you might have many creators, and there might be actually multiple people that are editors, and there might be people that are requesters and creators and editors. So it can go both ways, especially in a smaller library type situation. There might be one person that fills many of these roles, but it's still useful to kind of delineate these roles to find out how this stuff is happening. Okay, so as I was saying, who does this stuff? And once you determine who is playing these roles, it's a good idea to sketch out, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it's a nice idea to sketch out some kind of website content workflow. And it can be a nice visualization and help you determine how things work. And you can troubleshoot if there's any kinks in the process. You can see it. Okay, so central to all of this is Andy Griffith. Not really Andy Griffith, but the role that I like to call the content sheriff. So This might strike some as a bit authoritative, but I really think that someone needs to be overseeing this whole process. It's very fun and nice and happy if we would consider all of this to maybe just happen organically, but you know, having a website is like constantly publishing a newspaper or a magazine, and I think it takes some oversight in order for it to be really good. So if you don't have someone in charge of this process, or at least overseeing it, consider or a team of people, consider putting that in place. And really, hopefully, it's not the IT department. Nothing against the IT department, but I think the job of an IT department, as far as web stuff goes in a library, could be to support website development and maybe to do the technical stuff. But content, I think, is best left to a specialist. Okay, so here are some important questions to think about as far as the requesting and creation of content. So do you have a plan for what you want to say on your website? Do you have a plan for what your patrons need? And in order to determine what your patrons need, you kind of have to know who your patrons are. So I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about persona development. It's an important part of content because you need to know who your audiences are in order to know what kind of content you want to have on your website. So a persona is an archetypal representation of a library user. So here I just have a template that I use sometimes to create personas. And there are a couple elements in personas that I'd like to highlight. So there's often a picture involved. They have a fictional name. It might have a job title, and there's some biographical information about them, and it lists their goals and might have a quote. And really the idea is to invent these people based on real-life patrons, library users, and have everything you do for your website and actually library services in general relate to their goals and needs in some way. So here's a really quick crash course on how you might make a persona. So one way to do this is through user interviews, and it's something that I think libraries should be doing more and more of. So let's say, for instance, we have a librarian here interviewing this pirate. And the librarian says, "All right, Mr. Pirate, why don't you tell me a little bit about your life?" And the pirate says, "Okay, well, you know, I command that ship that's back there, and let's see, I generally get on the ship and I'm gone for a few months at a time, and I'm sailing with my pirate friends, and after about a month we get pretty bored on the ship, so we stop off at this island, and we hang out there, we refill our rum supplies, and then we go searching for treasure more, and then, you know, after 3 or 4 months we come back home here and hang out until it's time to set off." And so, okay, the librarian writes all this down, takes some notes, and then interviews some more pirates. And maybe he hears very similar things about the pirate life. And so the librarian might match all these things up and come up with a representation for what his pirate library users might be like. And from there, might be able to brainstorm some stuff about what might need to be on a library website or library services in general. So some things that popped out for me during this interview process would be this pirate is gone for long amounts of time. They're often on another island. So the library might brainstorm and come up with, okay, we need to have extended loan periods for these folks. Or we might need mobile delivery of content since they're gone a lot. Or we might have a branch on this other island, right? So that's just a little bit about user interviews and persona development. And I keep seeing this pop up. I really don't know what that means. I'm just going to, okay, content sheriff, love it. Okay, I'm just going to ignore that. Back to the presentation. If you do not want to spend the time interviewing users, which I think you really should consider it, but if you can't, you can work with your librarians to just brainstorm common tasks and brainstorm some stuff about library users. So a bunch of librarians sit in a room and you spend a few hours, say maybe looking at your library mission and what you're supposed to be doing and how who your audiences are and how those things interact, and you just have like a no wrong answer type brainstorming session where you talk about and list all the different needs for these folks. And it's important if you do this to not think about people in terms of their demographics, but rather their behaviors and their kind of roles. So instead of the typical kids, teens, adults, which we see on so many library websites, and I'm not saying that's not appropriate, but instead of thinking about people that way, maybe we want to think about them as researchers, readers, and learners. And certainly some demographic stuff can pop in there, like special populations, like maybe senior citizens. If you have a really big community of elderly people, sorry. So that's one way to do it. You won't get as much solid information because it's still, as much as we librarians try to get in the heads of the user, we still have our bias, right? So anyhow, after you brainstorm all these different tasks that some people might want to do on your website or in your library, you group them together, and that's how you can kind of form these roles. So you know, all the research stuff might come together, and that might be the researcher role, and you can create a persona for that. You name them, right? And then you have your persona document. So hopefully, once you determine what these people need, you can compare what you have to what these people need, and hopefully it's not apples and oranges. Hopefully you have some stuff there already. But the idea is to create stuff that they need. Okay, so here is what this is how I think of most library websites. So most library websites are like the spice cabinet in your library, right? You're not really sure how the stuff got there. You're not really sure if it's fresh or not. You don't know who necessarily put the stuff there. You don't know if anyone's using it. Like, stuff kind of moves around, but you're not really sure if anyone's enjoying it, and you don't know who's going to get more if you run out. So does that sound familiar? But there's a way for us to get a handle on what is on our library websites, and that's through this wonderful thing called a content audit. So there are two types of content audits, and one is called a quantitative audit, and the other is a qualitative audit. So, but most content audits start with a quantitative portion, and if there are any catalogers listening now, you should rejoice, because you essentially get to catalog a library website in a content audit. So you can see on the left there's a unique page ID and a page name and a URL. This is the beginning of a content audit that I led Seattle Public Library through, and so basically that would be the basic quantitative content audit. Maybe you'd also include what the pages are about and who created it. So that would be, if you can see, columns A through E. And you go ahead and you list, again, every single piece of content on your library website. If that sounds overwhelming, yeah, it kind of is. It can be a lot of work, especially if your website is really, really deep. But these things, especially if you end up with a huge Excel file, can be useful for showing administration and other people, hey, we've got a lot of stuff here. We need resources dedicated to getting a grip on it. So I think the real value for content audits comes once the quantitative audit is done, and you can get to the qualitative and assessing the quality of each piece of content. So there are a number of different ways that you can assess the quality of the content, and here are some things to get you started. So accuracy, usefulness, use, web written, which we'll again talk about that in a minute. If it's on message, if you have any kind of big branding platform, when it was last updated. So you go through each piece of content and you judge if this thing is accurate, and you assign it a 0, 1, or 2, for instance. I recommend a small scale rather than like a 1 through 10 or a 1 through 5. 0, 1, and 2 is generally pretty useful. That way you know whether the stuff is, say, 0, absolutely terrible, 1, so-so, or 2 should be fixed immediately, right? And you can go through and see how this stuff plays out. And through the power of Excel, you can then sort these different columns and see, okay, here are all the pages that were judged to be not so web written. And maybe we need to fix these right away, especially if we sort, say, 2 columns at once, and we sort the used column, or the use column, and the web written column. We can find pages that are being used a lot and aren't web written very well, or we can find pages that are being used a lot and are inaccurate. So we better fix those first, right? And pages that aren't being used, well, we can either just cut the cord and get them off of our site, or we can fix them last, since no one cares about them anyway. And again, in this last LJ column that I wrote, there's a bit more about content audits, I think. Okay, so another important aspect of content strategy would be writing for the web. And I have some specific tips. Here's a list of a bunch of practical things that you can do to make the writing on your website better. Okay, so we know that reading on computer screens is pretty lame, and that's why, one reason at least, why these newfangled e-readers are popular, right? It's a bit more pleasant to read on a Kindle or an iPad, not be stuck in front of the computer all day long. So check out the Center for Plain Language. There's a new Plain Writing Act for 2010. It's pretty funny. It requires that the federal government write everything in a clear, concise, and well-organized manner. Hopefully that'll all work out. So majority of reading that people do on the web can be considered functional reading. So people don't really necessarily want to read long essays when they're browsing the web. They have a goal, they have a need, and they want to solve that, and then they want to do something else, hopefully to make their lives better, right? So that being the case, one way to think about your library website is as a big FAQ, or frequently asked set of frequently asked questions. I'm not saying necessarily that you should just have a list of questions and answers, but think about the things that people might be coming to your website for, the questions they might have about your library, or about your services, or just about, say, books or whatever, and you should be answering those questions. Another tip in general for websites is to make them as conversational as possible. So I mean this in a couple ways. Yes, I mean you should be answering questions, but also it should be with the friendly tone as well. So here is one sentence that appears on, I've seen it on a library website. A library card is required to check out library items. So we can make that, this is actually a bit longer, but I think it's a bit more friendly. With the library card, you may check out unlimited DVDs, books, and more. This is more about requirements and rules. This is about opportunities. And here we have something that definitely wouldn't work for every library, but a real friendly library, a relaxed, informal type place could, right? You can check out all sorts of stuff once you get a card. Do it already, right? So this is an example of conversational tone, I guess. Another way to think about your website is that it should be providing information rather than a bunch of documents. So don't think of your website as a stack of paper that people need to flip through to find what they need. Instead, think of it as a bunch of interconnected index cards. And we should be into this since our main man, Melville Dewey, invented the modern index card. So this should be something that someone can just glean a bit of info from and bounce back and forth depending on what their needs are. Okay, another best practice for writing for the web, PDFs. Boy, you better have a real good reason for providing a PDF. And this is like a basic web usability thing, right? And the fact that it's a portable document format should be an indication that it's providing documents rather than information, and we should really think about doing it. So why we would do it. So I would say unless there's a very, very special need for formatting that you can't do in HTML, just put the information on HTML rather than a PDF. You know, PDFs take people out of their browser. It can disrupt the whole experience. So question PDFs. Okay, this is a page structure tip here. And we need to write in an inverted pyramid style. So going through all the school that we've gone through, we're used to a different type of inverted pyramid style, and we need to do actually just the opposite. So when we wrote papers in library school, this is basically how it went, right? You start off your introduction, and you start off with general info about the topic, then you get more specific, and you narrow it down to your thesis, right? And then you have paragraphs supporting your thesis, et cetera, et cetera. We need to throw that out. We need to do just the opposite. We need to put the vast majority, the most important information first. The biggest points, your hardest hitting points, the stuff that you absolutely need people to read should go first. Then any kind of supporting info goes next. Then down below should go any kind of history or background information that might be relevant to read. Okay, so why do we need to structure our pages like this? Well, behind this pyramid, you'll see a heat map diagram. You maybe have seen this before, of how people read websites. And there's a pretty standard F-shaped pattern that people use to browse a website. So they scan across the front and top line. They maybe go down the left-hand column, and then they read across a couple more times. So the vast majority of people are going to read the whatever is first and at the top, and very few people will read stuff that is below. So since we know this, we should structure our pages accordingly. Okay, another best practice is to include, oh no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see, here's an example of a page that I helped the library DCPL rewrite. So this is a very text-heavy page, and it has a nice title, Get a Library Card, which is pretty clear, but there's all kinds of details down here, and there's a link to another application. So to make this in a more scannable format, we took out a lot of the prose, and we've this made like a question and answer type format. So instead of having details here that has a big long sentence, anyone who resides, works, pays property, etc., that's hard to glean anything from. But on this page, if a library user was reading it and they're interested in getting a card, well, they know right where the answer is going to be. Now, I don't think this page is perfect, and really, I think the first thing on this page should be our online card application. It's going to be like that at some point, but for now, it's like this. Okay, I want to talk about Whitespace a little bit, and I guess when I talk about this, this is definitely web writing, and web writing and page layout and graphic design. There's like a lot of overlap and some gray lines between all of, or gray lines, is that even a word? I don't know. There's a lot of overlap and shared space between these things. So web writing is not only about constructing things at the sentence level and the paragraph level, but also the page level, and that has to do with the page layout and graphic design. So here we have a nice page on the SPL site that does some good things, and you see, for instance, it is answering a question: what kinds of activities can I participate in at the library? But then it has a whole bunch of jumbled stuff underneath that I really can't stand at all. So if we just increase the white space a little bit, it instantly becomes a bit more legible. So don't be afraid of white space, and make sure things are spaced appropriately. So this, things are run together and it makes it hard to read. This is actually just as bad in that the content is floating between the headers, and I'm not really sure where the content belongs to and what it's anchored to. So find a happy medium, something like this. And just to emphasize or to show you that the page layout doesn't need to be, changes in page layout don't need to be totally drastic. I want to illustrate a number of different steps that this, using the library page on SPL site, could go through to become more web written and more usable. So this page is okay, but I think it's a little bit on the busy side, and I think I'm just going to switch back and forth now. I think the question at the top of the page, how can I find someone at the library to help me, is way too small, so that can be increased. Next revision is getting rid of that awful red emergency alert at the top, and we could do something else with that probably. This page has a problem with titling and placefulness. So we have using the library at the top, then we have get help in the middle of this content section. So I don't really know what the title of the page is. Using the library is actually the section of the website. So increasing the title of the page and the size would be a bit better. Next image we're going to see is getting rid of just extraneous crummy filler pictures, especially because I don't know if you can see my cursor now, hopefully, but these pieces of dark purple text on a light background are kind of like links, right? Because all these things on the left are dark purple, piece of dark purple text on a light purple background. A, that's not so good for contrast and visibility. But B, we have some confusion because should these things be links or are they links or whatever? Anyhow, if we get rid of all that, extend that top banner, the page just becomes a bit more calm and easy to read. And lastly, we could add in that emergency alert by just putting a red stripe across the top of the page, perhaps. So here we have just a difference. Generally, things are larger, and there are fewer things on the page. And I think it makes for a much more easy to read page. And I wanted to take you through this to highlight the fact that you don't need to go through a full year-long, pull your hair out website redesign process to improve your pages. It's much, much better to get into kind of a fast, iterative cycle where you can make small changes and you're making little improvements every other week, every week, or every month or something. But getting that momentum, making small changes and making constant improvements can really increase staff morale, and it's constantly making things better for library patrons. And what's more, At the end of it, well, I guess it never ends, but generally at the end of the big website redesign process, everyone is confused because there's a whole new layout and patrons have learned to use your site in a certain way, and then you're kind of uprooting them from that when you're launching a whole new design. So website redesigns, don't do it. Constant improvements, that's the way to go. Okay, remove unnecessary words. We've talked about this a little bit, but if I'm going to be a bit more precise, we should just say remove words in general. Here's another example of that. Here's a totally recycled press release on SPL's site, and this is just a press release copy and pasted into their CMS. But if we're going to make that appropriate for the web, we could basically make everything larger and have some grab-and-go type information. It should really apply to your URLs as well. So if your URLs are all messy and crazy, like at the top of the screen here, consider using your CMS to make things a bit more intelligible. So URLs like on the bottom are much easier to put on promotional material. They're much easier to share with patrons, and they actually provide some context for the page. So if we were all in person now, I think maybe we'll do it. I want you to rewrite this information. So take 2 or 3 minutes, and I want you to rewrite this, and I want it to be more appropriate for the web. Now, the only challenge is that you have to maintain all the meaning, so you can't change any of the meaning of this. So take 2 minutes amongst yourselves, and then we'll have someone share.
Okay, Aaron, what I'm seeing on the screen is a 20 cent per day fine is assessed for every adult book or CD that is kept beyond its due date. For every day a DVD is late, a $1 fine is assessed. There are no late fines for children's books. Fine revenue is used to purchase new books, DVDs, and CDs. Is that what you have?
Yes.
Okay.
This is actually from the library website as well.
Oh. You're not going to tell us which one?
No. My secret.
While people are doing that, Aaron, I did have a question come in from Shelley. So maybe you want to take that while people are working on their rewrite. Do you suggest we add a link and direct folks to related articles rather than including the entire article?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the context, but yeah, I think really a standard web best practice would be having a blurb and then a link rather than pasting in a whole separate article. So bring out the most important points, the points that you think are most interesting or relevant, and then link to the full article, I would say.
Okay, and as you all are doing this exercise, you don't have to relate all of these things to me. What I might just do, if someone is on mic or telephone and they want to share what they wrote, I will unmute one of you. So don't worry if you don't have that option. That's fine. This is more kind of for yourself.
Hey Jamie, I can't remember. I have a little bit more time today. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you have. I have 142, and if we go over a little bit, if there's questions, that's fine. Okay.
Okay. So can we have
Irma,
one person?
yeah, Irma said she had a rewrite that she wanted to share. And it's not working. Okay, does anyone have a rewrite that is on a phone or microphone that you'd want to read to us? I'm not seeing anything.
No one, everyone's feeling shy?
Or they're not done. I have a few suggestions that came in. Um, one person said, use a different type, bullet points, different background, do not like white on black. Fines are used to purchase new items. Maybe word this in a more positive way.
Yes, I would like the idea of making a list or bullet points for this, or making some kind of table where the items are listed on the left and the fines are...
Elizabeth, do you want to share your rewrite? Are you on? Okay, Erin, why don't you go ahead with...
All right, I'll move on, and I think you all maybe get the point. So here's another simple thing. Don't write in all caps. You don't want to be yelling at your library users. And you might be saying, but Aaron, you've been writing in all caps this whole presentation. What's up with that? Well, this isn't a website. It's a presentation, and I think it's easier to read. Okay, pages must not be written by passive-voiced librarians. That's a little bit of a joke. And that I wrote that in the passive voice, and you should make sure you're writing in the active voice rather than the passive voice. And one thought per sentence, and fragments can work. Don't feel the need to write the King's English on the web. And a lot of librarians bristle at this because they see the library as a place that is upholding good grammar, etc. And that's definitely can be true, but just because something is written simply does not mean at all that it's dumbed down. In fact, I think it can be more challenging and show greater care to write simpler sentences and simpler paragraphs than writing just as if you were writing a document. Okay, some tips about font size. This is pretty straightforward, but you don't want things to be too big and you don't want things to be too small. Find your happy medium there. Here's a basic lesson in typography. Sans serif fonts don't have these little extraneous things on the edges of the letters, and in general on the web it's best practice for text in a body, main text, to be sans serif. It's easier to read generally. Bigger titles and headlines can contain serifs, and on paper it's kind of just the opposite in that serif fonts are easier to read at the text level. So make sure your body text is sans serif. This you might have trouble seeing because I have not used adequate contrast, just to show you an example. So make sure that there is adequate contrast, unlike that dark purple on light purple that I showed earlier. So this is related to having a conversational tone. When you are writing on your website, whenever you mean the library, use we. And patrons can be either you or I, depending on the situation. So instead of saying the library prohibits cell phone use or whatever, blah, 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 or the library is having a program tomorrow night on travel, say we. It's a much more friendly and engaging word. And so here is what I mean by we or you or I. So if you're asking a question, use you or your. So what is your email address? Or if you're writing something, a question that the patron might ask, you can use I. So how do I reset my PIN is just kind of easier to understand at a glance than writing how do you reset your pin, or how you reset your pin, if that makes sense. So links, have some context in the links. Don't use click here. So instead of having click here to go to your account, you could write access your account. So this is a much more active way to phrase it, and it gives some information. So skip that brilliant animation. If I wasn't using a PDF here, if I was using a presentation, I would have had a really great animation that would have annoyed you all. Just don't do it. And another best practice would be to show library users and librarians on your website. I really like the Vancouver Public Library website. They do a really great job with featuring library users, having a real library quote, real quote from a real library user. On the DCPL site, we have it on the top of every page. We have a quote from a librarian or a library user, and it's a nice way to let people connect with the library. And by the way, people somehow can tell if the pictures you're using on your library site are fake or real. So don't bother with any kind of stock photography or anything like that. Get some legit pictures, because people somehow have this sixth sense about it. Okay, much like you might have a page template for laying out a page, consider having content templates as well, and it's a nice way to make things uniform and intelligible, and it makes writing and creating things easier. So you might need a template for how your events are, how your events will appear on the web, for instance. And if you're going to have multiple people contributing to the web, which is a good idea, to your website, have a checklist. So before something goes up online, or maybe before it's submitted for approval, make a checklist that people should run down and say, okay, this, for instance, this uses we for the library. This is this has as few words as possible. This is in a list format, et cetera, et cetera. This is conversational, and this is a way to educate people and to make sure content is of a certain quality before it gets through the approval process. I really think that you don't have to sacrifice having an authentic, fun voice in your writing to make it appropriately written for the web. Some people think that web writing can make things bland and a bit, say, like corporate speak, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think it can actually liberate us to spend a lot of time thinking about our writing, and just because web writing isn't, say, off the cuff doesn't mean that it is inauthentic or boring. So find the balance there. Here are some additional resources. I really like the first two books. Letting Go of the Words is absolutely essential for learning about this stuff, and Content Strategy for the Web goes in a bit deeper about workflow development and content audits, etc. Hey, thanks for your time, and here's my contact info. If you have any questions after this, you can go to my website or send me an email, but for now I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thanks, Aaron. I had a question come in from Shelley, and she wanted to know if the rotating pictures on website are considered animation, or are those okay?
That's a really good question. No, those are useful, especially if done tactfully and they're not all frantic. But I think rotating, say like book titles, or we have events rotating on the DCPL website. Those can be done well for sure.
Cool. So again, if any of you have any questions for Aaron, feel free to let us know. And yes, we are recording this, and his slides will also be available as well. Aaron, I have a question for you. Do you think with more libraries using Facebook fan pages that as a whole, are we paying less attention to our actual websites, and should we be doing that, or how do you find that happy medium? I mean, if more people are on, we know a lot of people are on Facebook, and that's where we need to pay some attention. But I guess where do we find that balance between managing the like a Facebook fan page or a Twitter page or something and our website?
Yeah, that's a really great question because we all have limited resources, right? And we need to find the most efficient way to do that. So, I mean, I feel so weird saying this, but I've become a little bit more conservative over the past few years about this stuff, and I'm not saying that I don't think libraries should experiment and try new things at all, but I do think it's unfortunate that some libraries have super abysmal websites, which should be a basic thing, and are spending time and effort, a lot of time and effort on other things. Now, I think what I'm going to settle on for my answer is this. I think if a library wants to have a web presence besides just a website, I mean, it's absolutely necessary, and I've had a really good experience with DCPL on Twitter, for instance. But my strategy for this would be make the website as manageable and small as possible, and spend as little time on it as you can get away with, more or less. So make it small so it's not totally burdensome, and then you can make that as good as possible, and then from there go to other places where your library patrons might be. And again, I guess another kind of colder, harder way to look at this would be to look at usage stats. So try to find out how much your library website is getting used for, I guess, page hits. Find out how much traffic a Facebook page is getting, or how much interaction you're having, say on Twitter, and maybe use that a little bit to divide your resources. Now, I also am not ignorant to the fact that having an active Facebook page or Twitter page gives a certain type of cred or cachet to the library that can be important beyond just the cold, hard numbers. I'm not saying cachet in the library world at all, but I'm saying it appeals to a certain type of library patron. And that's also really important because I think libraries have a tendency to not do certain things so they are more inclusive. And for instance, I think it's very important that we are concerned with digital divide issues, etc. I think it's important we're concerned with access to information issues. But I think sometimes we concentrate on those things so much we are not appealing to other audiences. So that's a long answer to say yes. Resources are limited. Personally, I mean, this makes me sound like such a curmudgeon, but I would much rather see a library have a really kick-butt web page than a totally marginal web page and a totally uninteresting Twitter presence and Facebook presence. If you're gonna do this, make sure one of them is excellent, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And if other things are suffering because you're spread too thin, cut the cord on something.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have is, do you have any ideas on how to refer to adult versus children's materials? For example, when we say that adult books have a fine as opposed to children's books not having a fine, the use of the term adult books is awkward.
Yeah, totally. And this is such a perennial problem. And some people have started, or people have done studies about library jargon, and no good definitive answers have been found, and it's really difficult. And especially for things like reference and databases and those types of labeling issues, I almost wonder if the problem isn't so much the labels, or if it's the fact that we have things that are just completely not describable to people, because what we have is just so different from what they're used to. So as far as label issues go in general, if you have questions or concerns about what you're calling things in your library on your website, this is a great opportunity to engage library users and to do, like, say, some card sorts or some labeling exercises with people. And you don't have to do a big study. You can grab people just out in the stacks or out in the library and do what's like a little guerrilla study or a quick and fast test, where you describe these things in the most general terms to people, and you see what they come up with. And if you were to ask 30 people over a week to name these things, you might find some patterns developing, and you might find that there's one clear winner. So I would say refer to your library users to see what they say.
Okay. And where do you recommend that things like links should go? Should they be at the top, on the side, on the right-hand side? Do you have any?
I guess I would need to know what type of link. Maybe the person means navigation. Boy, it's hard to say. That's depends how much navigation there is. There's so many factors there. I don't think there is a one thing I can say that's right or wrong. I mean, definitely the web standard is a menu across the top, okay, and possibly along the left as well.
So should RSS feeds and Facebook links and logos be at the bottom of each page?
Boy, totally depends on. Totally depends. There's not a best practice for this, because it really depends on overall what the goals of the page are and what the overall information architecture of the whole site is. So unfortunately, I can't provide an answer without studying the page.
And would you mind hitting a key? It looks like we're looking at your screensaver. We can't see your contact info. Are there any new trends that you are seeing kind of coming down the pipeline in web content or web writing?
New trends. Well, here's a trend that I'm going to try to start. How about this? I'm in the process with a couple of partners creating a what's going to be really close to a one-page library website. This is going to be kind of an exercise in minimalism and simplicity, and through a couple of kind of tricksy type things and some neat geek kind of stuff like JavaScript, we're hoping to come up with a really simple library page that requires minimal navigation. We're hoping to wrap this thing inside of WordPress, so it will be a WordPress theme that libraries could use. So that's the trend I'm starting to hope for, simple library pages. And once we get this done, I'll probably make a post about it at walkingpaper.org, so you can find out about it there.
Okay, and would you mind going back to the slide that had the book titles listed on the books that you recommended? We've had a few people who've asked to look at those. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions for Aaron out there before we let him go at all? So are you doing any, I know you and I talked about you presenting at the Computers and Libraries Conference. Are there any other conference or workshops that you have coming out nationally Aaron?
Let's see. Well, I'm going up to Ontario Library Association Super Conference next month, and I'll be down in Texas in April, and I'll be at Computers and Libraries. So if you're there, come find me and say hi. And that's like all conference-wise. I'm doing. I've got work I'm doing for SPL that I kind of mentioned before, and a number of other libraries, but. Those are the speaking gigs I have lined up at the moment.
Okay. So I guess more than anything, you would recommend keeping websites simple and small?
Yes, please.
Okay. That was one last comment that we had coming in.
Yes, I think that's a great way to end the note, because I guess I didn't say this directly today, but I'll just throw it out there. Really, half the stuff on your library website, people probably don't care about. And getting rid of that really will enable you to make the stuff that they do care about easier to find and easier to use.
Excellent. All right. Well, Aaron, I want to thank you very much for presenting for us this afternoon. Thank you all for joining in. And again, this will be recorded and uploaded to Blip TV.